What's the most you've ever spent on a piece of artwork? 5 cents? $5? How about $100? Or $29 million? Over the past few years, we've seen art sell for crazy amounts of money. These works range from classical art, to bananas taped to walls, to NFTs that only exist on the internet. I've always been intrigued by what makes art so valuable to actually own. On one hand, if the art is attractive to somebody, it's more valuable to them. But with the internet, you can experience lots of things without leaving the comfort of your couch. Actually owning artwork taps into a couple deeper factors. Firstly, like in economics, scarcity, or the limited supply of a certain thing, can drive up its price. In some ways, the Mona Lisa is valuable to the Louvre Museum because they can control who gets to experience it. But there's a lot of artwork that's one of a kind and still isn't worth anything. Part of the difference has to do with the human connections that come with valuable art. This could include historical significance in a community, personal connection to the artist, or maybe just the passing of an idea or feeling from person to person. The realist artist Edgar Degas once said, "Art is not what you see, but what you make others see." That then begs the question, how far does the term art extend? Is architecture art? I would say so, but how about teaching, or engineering, or computer programming? Somehow, it depends on how the person creating interacts with the person consuming the product. The shaping of ideas into an experienceable outcome seems to be a key component of art. Experience requires more than just time on the part of the consumer, but also the mental participation, which we call attention. Interestingly, I think one of the defining features of Gen Z technology is the monetization of this same attention. Today, artwork can be valued in and of itself, and then almost separately, the attention that it draws can be auctioned to the highest bidder and run ads on. On one hand, people who care about the artist find value in their art's scarcity. On the other hand, value can be derived by an algorithm based on purely numerical metrics, such as views, likes, and follower counts. For some reason, this reminds me of this great video by Tom Scott, where he mentions Twitter bots and entropy in the same 5 minutes. But what I remember most is that his video title used some code to read out that same video's view count. Turns out that code is actually pretty easy to implement. So what if I made some sort of artwork that's price was literally tied to the view count of the video about it? Well, this is that video, and this is that artwork. Supposedly everybody's first video on YouTube is pretty cringy, so I figure I may as well make mine a sort of social experiment. Just for fun, I'm gonna increase the price of this art by $1 each time this video is viewed, and decrease it by $1 for every 25 subscribers this channel gets, and every 5 likes this video gets. And just to make it more interesting, it won't be posted for sale until the price passes $15,960. And yes, that number was completely arbitrary. You're probably thinking, that's a pretty ridiculous price. But hear me out. I went through 100 different channels that I follow and found that on average, they have 25 times more subscribers than views on their first video. Obviously, I don't expect to reach those same levels of success, but somewhere between me now and them now, the price of this art will go to $0. And that's what makes this an experiment. The thing is, on average, those 100 channels were also 8 years old. So this is gonna need to be something that I wanna keep for at least that long. I'm thinking maybe to do some sort of motivational word art sign sort of thing. The other problem is I've never actually made something aesthetic like this. And I only have 7 days to finish this project before flying to Dallas for my brother's robotics competition. You do know it's Monday, right? What? So, it turns out I've been sleeping this whole week, and now we're leaving in 36 hours. I'm not sure I'll be finishing in time, but here goes. My initial idea is to have LED lit words on a dark black background. I'm thinking to make the background out of wood and then burning it in using a technique called
Yakisugi-ita.
I also want to try out engraving different patterns into the wood before burning it and then sanding off the top layer just to see if I can get different textures in the background. I had a couple extra fence boards lying around from another project, so I cut them down and glued them into a square panel. While that was drying, I drew up some random shapes for the background. You know how English teachers get you to come up with these overcomplicated explanations for every detail in a reading? Well, that's how I felt while drawing these very meaningful scribbles. Anyways, I tossed them between a couple programs and then carved them up on a router. By this point, it was getting kind of dark outside, so I played around with a bit of slow-mo while torching the top surface. It took a while for the flame to reach the internal corners of the engraving, but eventually I got that gator skin look that I was looking for in the cavities. I brushed off the charred layer of the non-engraved areas and gave it a coat of tung oil. The next morning, I started on the top board, where I wanted the lettering to look like a solid light. Tough thing for me was getting the light to be diffused enough not to see the individual LED chips from the strip under the surface. I thought about making a test sample, but I was running out of time, so I threw the Words graphic file into a CAD program, made it a hollow container, and sent it to the 3D printer. These LED strips really don't like being bent in this direction, so instead I attached them to the inner walls of the letters and added a reflector out of foil tape to direct the light out the front. This part took me way too long, although it would have probably been quicker if I hadn't been finishing a season of I should really listen to more podcasts. Anyhow, our flight was leaving in less than 12 hours, and I still needed to work out how I was going to light the bottom words on the sign. While testing out the individual LED sections in the 3D print, I noticed that one of the sections wasn't lighting up. Looking closer, it seemed at some point I had had the silly idea that cutting the LEDs not on a designated line could work. And then I had glued it in place without even testing it. The glue wouldn't come out, and I didn't have time to redo the whole word, so instead I just added a second LED section on the opposite wall and kept going. Hopefully nobody's looking too closely at the final result. I wanted the second half of the words to use these neon LED strips that create a continuous but flexible strip of light. To test which color would best fit with the burned wood background, I laid the lights randomly on the wood panel, plugged the bare wires into a power supply, and then well, a couple weeks have passed. I didn't even come close to finishing the project before Dallas, but the rest of the build went pretty quick. I wanted a frosted plastic top sheet to cover the 3D printed letters, so I took apart this acrylic book holder that someone was throwing away, routed out the same lettering file as the 3D print, painted the edges with a coat of mirror and then black paint, and then sanded the top and bottom to mimic a translucent sheet. I really wasn't liking how little diffusion was provided by this acrylic, but it just so happened that that day my uncle was throwing away some scrap plastic U-channel for replacing a fluorescent light bar. A quick snap and then re-gluing turned it into a relatively flat panel, which was easily cut into the same letters. I was going to paint the edges just like the clear sheet, when I tried just sandwiching the diffusion layer between the clear and 3D printed layers, creating this neat offset sort of drop shadow edge lighting effect. I decided to leave it and went to glue the top layers together when I made a pretty silly mistake. For other parts of this project, I'd been using cyanoacrylate to glue things together without a problem. So I thought I could do the same thing between these two pieces and got everything ready and spread out a thin layer of CA on one side. I lined the layers up and carefully lowered the top sheet down, but just as they came in contact, I felt something burning in my throat and eyes. Turns out this much glue off-gasses some nasty chemicals. Anyways, after a bit of chaos, half the letters had been glued together, but slightly offset, and the others had snapped off. Okay, it wasn't actually that bad, but I did pick up a slower setting 2-part epoxy for the rest of the plastic gluing. After adhering the top 2 layers, the stack then had to be glued to the 3D print. Ooh, this looks like a good idea. Even though the camera fell off my mask, the gluing turned out okay, and after a quick sanding, I can move on to the second half of the words. To attach the LED neon rope to the board, I found these drywall screws that I had enough extra of, and now I need a clip that maybe looked sort of like this? Yeah, that should work. Just need a couple more. No more than that. More than that.
Please, sir, I want some more.
Even more. Yeah, that should work. These fix the strip at certain points, and you just need enough of them to form the letters. Easy, but very tedious. I taped down a paper printout of the letters I wanted for reference, and just poked the screws through the paper. As you can see, half of what makes this part take so long is that each separate section has to be wired individually with holes for the wiring to pass to the backside. Speaking of which, after ripping off the paper, I flipped it over, hot glued any screw points poking through, and soldered each of the sections in parallel. After that, I gave it a quick sanding down, painted the edges black, and this is the result. I'll be the first to say that it didn't turn out exactly as I'd hoped it would. As you can see, the coloring on the top board isn't quite even, especially where the wires and glue distorted the light. Even so, given this was my first try at making an LED sign, and what the sign actually says, it definitely turned out exactly as it was supposed to. I learned a lot in the process of making this, so I hope you found this video interesting or at least a little bit entertaining. And if you did, it would be great if you could... And while you're at it, comment down below, how much do you think this will sell for? If you're the first one to get either the date or the price right, I'll send you $500.